Welcome to this tutorial in which we will be creating a looting system and also looting tables. So let's jump into it and see what we will be creating. Before we continue with the video, if you like what I'm doing here on this channel, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel a lot. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Here we have what we will be creating in this series. We have a loot system and we also have a loot table system that's working with the loot system. So this character here over here has some debug functionality. By pressing a key here I can spawn an item from the loot system. And if I press it, you can see in the top left I get a certain amount of items that are possible loot, and one of them is chosen as the actual loot. And each time I press, a different item will be chosen from this pool of items randomly. Now this pool is determined by gameplay tags using things like looting categories. So you have things like armor types like helms and chests and boots and swords and stuff like that, but it also takes into consideration rarities. So we have the ability to filter and match against things like if it's a common, rare, legendary, artifact item and stuff like that. In addition to being able to loot or drop and spawn an item from the looting table or from the loot system, by having a pool of items, we also have the ability to spawn items using a key. So on a different key on my keyboard here, I can spawn a specific item based on a key instead from this loot system, and it will always spawn it that way. So you have two different options, either spawning an item from a key or from a pool, depending on some criteria. In addition to that, we also have a loot table system, which this character is currently making use of. So in front of me, when I press a key here, this character will die. And he has an actor component on him that allows his death to spawn an item from his loot table. So he has 3 different items on him. He has the possibility to spawn a helm, a sword, or a shield in this case, although it's called a chest piece, I think. So yeah, pressing that button now, you can see he dies and he spawns a sword. And if we go and check what that looks like, his character here has the component here, and here we have defined what his loot table looks like. So this is what we will be going through and creating in this series. First off, let's actually go through some of the things that we will be using in this. In this project, we will be using the Ancient Treasures free asset pack. You can find this on the Epic Marketplace, and you find it on the category Permanently Free Collection. So add this to your project so you have the same assets available to you as I do. So here we are inside of Unreal Engine 4.26. In this episode, we will be creating a looting system and also looting tables to work with that looting system. So how do we go about doing this? Well, to start off with, we're going to be trying to make it scalable as always, and we'll also be trying to structure it in a way so that it sort of makes sense. And we will be going through this as we encounter each part and then talking through why we're doing things in the way that we're doing them. To start off with, normally you will have a game. Actually, let's start our first folder. Let's create a folder here called looting system, like so. Everything we create today we will keep in this folder to keep everything organized. To start off with, we want to create a game mode, and the reason we want to create a game mode is because we want to have some of our loot logic in the game mode. Normally when you have something like a multiplayer game, you would have the server handling all of the important things. So something like spawning loot, for example, would be something that the server would handle. So we will be using our game mode as our sort of server is handling spawning stuff. So let's start off with doing that. We'll create a blueprint class. We'll create it of game mode over here and click select. We call it BP_game mode. That is simple enough. Now that we have that created, we want to go to the world settings over here. If you do not have your world settings available here, you can find it under window and world settings here. what we want to do is we want to override the default game mode. So this specific level then will get this game mode instead of whatever is set in the project. So if you were to make another level, you would have to override it there or set this as the project default if you want this to be the one that you're working with. But since we're just going to be working with it in this level, we will override it. So we'll choose BP game mode over here. What will happen now is that we will get a default pawn as our default pawn class. We do not want this. We want to use the third person character that we have over here because this is the third person template. So we'll go here, click, type in third person character, and then save all. And then we play to just check and everything is working still. So that's all good and fine. So that's our game mode. So now we have that created and we will be coming back to this later. For now, we need to talk a little bit about how we want to structure this, because structure is important when you create larger systems, because it allows you to plan out a little bit and foresee problems that you have, and hopefully you'll make good enough decisions about how you will organize things. When it comes to a looting system, we want to have a few different things. We want to have the ability to spawn a specific item. We want to have the ability to spawn an item from a group of potential items. And we also want to create a loot table, meaning a character has a predefined set of items that he is able to drop if he dies. So those are the things that we're going to be creating. To achieve this and make this easily organizable, we will be using data tables. So to create a data table, we need to first have a structure. The structure defines how the data table looks. And to create our structure, we also need some complementary things right now. So one of the things that we will be needing is something that's called an enumerator. We find it under blueprints and enumeration. We call this e_loots key. Will be a fine name. The reason I have an enumerator is, if you have watched my other systems and stuff like that with data tables, is I prefer to have an enumerator as a duplicate key for our data tables to allow you to avoid making mistakes and makes it easy for you to pick different items in a data table. Now that we have that created, let's open that one up. We will be creating a new enumerator first, and what we will have in this enumerator is every name that we have in the data table. So for now, we don't have anything to put in here because we don't have the data table created, but this is where we will be filling that out. We'll save this for now and keep it open. Then we'll right click, go to blueprints and create the structure I talked about earlier. We'll call this s_loot. This structure will encompass all the information that we have inside of the data table. So here we start off with the thing that we just created, the e_loot key. This one we can call name, because that is what it will be. Next we create a new variable, and here we will choose to put in something called a loot category. This will be determining what kind of an item that we are actually spawning. And this will become clear in a little moment. But for now, we'll choose the type and choose a gameplay tag as the type. Next, we will be creating something and we'll call it a static mesh. This will just be the physical representation, the physical and visual representation of the item in the world. And we won't be touching this for a while, but we'll just create it now so it is there. We'll make the type of static mesh. And object reference. And last, actually this will be fine for now, I think. So we save that and we go to our content browser and we open up and we choose to create now our data table. We find data tables under miscellaneous, so we create the data table there. We need to choose a structure, so we click on our s_loot and we click OK. We'll call it dt_loot. We open that up, and here we can now create some of the items that we're going to be having. Now I won't be creating a huge amount of them, I'll just be creating some of them so we can demonstrate the functionality and that everything works when we're debugging and testing. So for now we'll add one row. We'll call the first one something like full plate helm. And then we'll press F2 to take the name from there, and then we'll go to our loot key and make sure that we paste in the same name over there, so we have the key there. We save, we go back to our data table. Opening up our row again, we can now choose a name here, as in the full plate helm. This comes from the enumerator we just populated. In the category, we can choose something that is a gameplay tag, but we haven't created any gameplay tags yet. So let's go and do that. You create gameplay tags by going to Edit and Project Settings, and then you have gameplay tags here. And here it allows us to create gameplay tags. And I won't be going into super much detail about this. I will be posting a link to a tutorial where I go through gameplay tags in more detail if you're unaware of how this works. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating an equipment category. And then we're going to be creating an armor category as a subset for that. And then we're going to be creating a subcategory or a sub-item called helm. So now we have an equipment of armor helm here. We continue by clicking plus here. I can add another sub tag so it gets the subsections before. And we'll add chest. We can do the same thing again. And we can call this one boots. After that, we can do something a little bit different. We can add an equipment that we call weapon, and under that we have a sword. So equipment.weapon.sword. And that probably should be fine for now, I think. So we'll close this out and then we'll go back to our data table. Now we can choose a loot category here. So we can choose equipment and we can say, okay, we have a full plate helm. Reasonably, it should be of the type armor and helm. Then we can choose a static mesh. For static mesh, this is where we will be using the different assets that we imported. So going to the assets, we have the ancient treasury over here. We open up the folder called meshes. And for me, I'm going to be choosing a few of these. You can choose others if you want to. I'll be choosing the SM Bangle 02. I will be choosing the SM Helmet 01. I'm holding down Control to mark multiples. We'll get the SM Shield 01 and the SM Sword 01. We'll drag these over to our folder and we'll say move here. Now they're lying over here. What we want to do is we want to remove the collisions for them because we will be spawning these into the world and we don't want them to interfere with our movement. So I will be going in here, and to see that they have collision, you can go to collision and show simple collision, and you'll see the green lines showing where all the triangles for the collision is. Going up to collision and saying remove collision will remove this. So we'll save after that, close it out, go to the next item, go to collision, remove collision, save, close, next item, collision, remove, save, close, next item, collision, remove, save, and close. So now that's all handled and done for us. We can now go and mark our helm, go back to our data table and click the arrow to have it shown as our static mesh for this. So that's good. We add our next item. Next item on the list is going to be, let's say, male boots. I'll copy the name also. I press enter. I go back to the enumerator. I add a new enumerator. I add the name that we just copied. Press enter, save, go back to our table. Now that we have that done, we can now choose male boots here in the enumerator. We can choose boots as the category for this. And we can choose the static mesh of the bangle here, for example. That will be our placeholder since I didn't have any boots here. That's not what I wanted to do. I do not want that one there. We'll clear that out. I want to go to the data table and put the bangle here, like so. And we save. And we add a new item. Adding the new item, we will add Excalibur because why not? We'll copy the name. We'll go back to the enumerator. We'll add the enumerator item name, enter, we'll save it, we'll go back to the data table, we'll make sure that the row has Excalibur set. We'll go to the equipment weapon sword category and mark that. And then for the item, we will choose the sword over here. We'll add that to the table, and we're done with that one. We can save and add our last item. Our last item will be chest plate of valor. A very epic name. We'll go back to our enumerator. We will add it over there, like so. And we'll go back to our data table, and we'll make sure that the chest plate of valor has the right enumerator. We'll choose a chest for that one, and we'll use the buckler shield as the model for it. So this is how you would be expanding this. You make sure that you have an enumerator for it, you choose a category for it, and you choose a static mesh to show what it looks like. This is how you would be scaling the system to have more items, essentially. So with that done, we can actually close this down for now. And we can also close down our structure, and we can also close down our key for enumerators for now. Let's actually get to the part where we write some code for this functionality then, and talk a little bit about how this is working. So let's open up our game mode. In here we'll go to the event graph. Now the very first thing is we want to have some item spawn, right? So we'll create a function for it, and we'll call it spawn loot. Normally you want to spawn it in some area, so adding a vector makes sense. So we have a place to spawn it. We can call it the spawn location. In addition to that, we may also want to actually be able to choose which kind of loot we want to spawn. So we created a gameplay tag, which is fulfilling the need for our loot category, right? So we call this loot category. This is the one that we called in our data table things like shields and swords and armor and stuff like that. So this is what that will represent. In addition to that, we also want the ability to spawn a specific item if we want to. So we have two different ways of spawning loot here. And that one we handle with the enumerator we created. So if we add another input here and we add e_loot key, the key here represents a key in the data table. So you can say, I want this specific item to loot or to spawn. So we'll call this the, let's call it loot key. Like so. So the intention here is that either we choose to have a specific item spawn, or we choose to have a certain amount of possible items spawned that matches criteria from the loot category. So to determine that, we need to immediately check against the loot key to see, is it a specific item or a group of items? So we add a branch here, like so, and we check, is it against something here? But we see that we have only items here chosen. We can't choose anything like opposite of it or inverse of it. This might make sense in a moment here, but if we go back to our enumerator and we add an item here which we call a row, which we call slash. Now this might make more sense to have it in the top, and you can actually move this up if you want to, but I think it will be fairly slow to do so. No, it goes fast, okay. So we'll move it to the top, like so. So now we have it, okay, there we have it in the top. And we save. This will represent our not chosen anything option. To make sure that everything is working fine, sometimes when you mess around with enumerator that's used in structures and stuff like that, things can get a little bit weird. Like you see here now we have the stars over here. That's because these things were affected by our change, so they need to be saved again. So this one has now as default the blank, which is good. We'll save that one, we'll close it down. Let's open up the data table and make sure everything looks okay here. Here we can actually see that it broke a little bit. We can see that the name here changed from full plate or helm to, no, actually the full plate helm changed from that to slash, and the mail boots changed, and everything basically changed here. So we need to make sure that these are all correct again. So we'll change this back to full plate, this one back to mail boots, this one back to Excalibur, and this one back to chest plate of Valor. So it was very good that we checked. So that's a consequence of changing an enumerator like that, and you need to be aware of it. So if you do it in the future, you don't get surprised that something is broken. Compiling and saving, we can now choose the option of nothing here essentially. So this is our nothing choice. So if we come to the point where we say it's true here, that means that we have not sent in a specific item, but rather we have a loot category to go through instead to figure out what we're going to be spawning as loot. Since sending in a specific item of loot is much easier, we will start with that case first. So what we need to do is we need to take the loot key and we need to type in to string, because we need to convert it to a string. We want to have the one that says returns user-friendly name of enumerator. The reason we want a string is because we need to convert this for our data table. So if we type in here get data table row, you need to choose a table asset. We only have one data table available. And then you want to send in this as the row name. And now we get the conversion to the type here, which is name. So this is what we want to hook into when it's false. Now that we have that done, we will get a value out from this which contains the loot that we have. Or hopefully, and then it will go through the row here essentially. So then we know which loot to spawn. So we'll create we'll right click over here and do a promote to local variable because we want to save the name. We can clean this up a little bit like so maybe. And if row is found, we want to set this local variable. And this is so we can keep track of it to make it a little bit cleaner in a moment. We'll rename this to something more useful, something like local determined loot, like so. Compile, save, and then we want to actually spawn this. Now we haven't actually created a loot item yet, so let's start doing that. So we'll right click, create a blueprint class. We'll make it of a type actor. We'll call it BP underscore loot item perhaps. Opening up that, this is what we have. We're gonna be needing some very basic things here essentially. We're going to be needing a static mesh, like so. And as default we can put our cube or something like that, so we know that if we're spawning the cube we're doing something wrong. And in addition to that, we also want to say that we have a loot item key. And we'll make this of the type name. So this will be our information about what kind of item we are. So this object here, this class, will have this information to say what kind of an object it is. We will make it instance editable. You can click either here or down here by the eye. And we will make it expose and spawn also so that it's available when you create an object. We'll remove these events because we won't be needing them. But then we want to say on begin play, we want to get a data table. And we want to get a data table row. We want to send in our loot item over here as the item to be. We want to make sure that the data table DT loot is set as well. After that, we want to take our out row over here. We want to break it because this is what is contained within our structure from the data table. And in here we have the mesh. So now we can take the static mesh over here. We can set the mesh. And we can input, actually not that one, we want to set static, this one, I think, yes, this one. So we have an input for the new static mesh that it's supposed to be. So now it will be setting this upon creation essentially, which is good because that's what we want. So when we spawn this item, we will send in, we will get this pin exposed. and it will use that to find itself in the database table, and it will make sure to set the mesh to correspond to what we have actually assigned in the data table, which are the different static meshes that we chose earlier. So now we're done with this essentially, I think, so we can close this down. Now we're back in the game mode again, and we want to spawn our loot. Now we can actually spawn actor by class. We split the transform, and from here we want to actually, let's see here, we need to choose a class also. So BP loot item. Then you'll see we get our loot item key exposed over here, and we can drag in our local determined loot as that one. Then we need to have our spawn location from what we are getting into the function. And now we are essentially done with this part. Good, let's go to the more advanced example over here. Now we're going to be doing a little bit of code now, and I want to keep things a little bit tidy. So we'll create another function, and we'll call it determine loot. We want to have as an output a name, and we can call that one determined loot. Now going back to our other function, spawn loot, we can now drag in the determined loot over here, and we can then say that this is our determined loot, just like it was in the other pathing. So we'll set the local variable to be whatever this is, which means that we can afterwards hook it up here, and it will take the same route for spawning the actor, because they're both using this variable which we have set in these both cases. Wow. Okay. Now, determining loot is not going to be enough like this, because we need to make sure that we have enough information. And what do we need? We need to have the loot category over here. So let's add that. We go into our function, and we say we want to have another input. It wants to be of the type loot, or the name loot category, and the type is supposed to be a gameplay tag. We will be coming back to why we are using gameplay tags in a little moment when it actually becomes relevant, but for now just bear with me. Going back to our spawn loot, we can now drag our loot category, make sure that it's plugged into the function like so, and compile and save, and we can go back to the determine loot. Now what we want to do here are a few different things. First of all, we want to find all the loot that we have in the database table to make sure, does it fit our loot category that we're currently after. So we'll do a get table row names, and we have to specify which data table it's going to be, so it's going to be data table loot. We'll disconnect this for now. Now that we have this to work with, we're going to be looping on these results. This will give us all our individual row names. So this is just going to be the keys. Now, to find what information is available on a specific row, not just the name, but everything, we then get a table row, which will take a specific key, which is what we have here as the array index, and we make sure to use the data table loot. Now we will, for each of the different names that we have in the row, we will get their corresponding row information. From here we can take our out row and break it, so we get all the specific information on each row. And now we want to make a determination. What we want to do is we want to drag off the loot category and type in matches. We'll take the matches tag, which will match against one tag, which is exactly what we're sending in over here. So we'll drag the loot category over here, and now we'll talk a little bit about what we are doing. So how this works is, if we have a tag that matches, the tag that's sent in is matching the tag of the row that we're currently looping through, we will get a true or false result here. So if we are sending in here that we want the equipment weapon sword, which means the Excalibur weapon that we created, and we're walking through this loop, only the row that corresponds with that will return true. because all of these have different loot categories. So if we would choose the one that says equipment, weapon, sword, this is the only one that returns true. But we could also choose to have equipment.armor, and then it would return true on all of these three, but not the weapon, for example. Or we could have just equipment as our tag in, and then we could match all of these four. And this is only true as long as we're not clicking in this exact match, because if you have exact match marked in, it needs to be the whole specific gameplay tag to match. So this is what we're doing here. So after this we can have a branch to check, well, did it fulfill the criteria that we're checking against here? If it did, then we can say, well, we have an item that might be interesting here. Let's save this. So we'll add a local variable, we'll call it local item pool. So we'll make it of a type name, and we'll make an array of it. This we can then use to drag out here, and we can say add to it. So every item that matches will add to this array. So we'll drag this array element over here, and we'll route it around a little bit so it's a little bit more easily to read, or more easy to read, like so. So now we get at this point, we have added it over here, and we'll keep doing that as we go through this loop essentially. Once we are done with that, we'll get to our completed node. Once we get to our completed node, what we want to do is we want to take all of the local items that we have said as these are potentials. Then we want to consider which item to spawn from. However, what we will do first is we will make a for loop. And this is because we want to create some debugging for us to see how is this going to work and what is being done here essentially. We'll drag off a print, and we'll drag off an append from the string. And in this one we will type in possible loot colon, and then we'll drag in our array element as the B connector, so that will be the name of the item. So we'll say each of these items will be a possible loot. That's what we will be printing out on the screen. We'll change the duration to 5 seconds, and we'll make the color something like purple, let's say. When we're done with that, we want to continue with our actual logic. So now we need to determine which of these items to actually spawn. So let's create a new function for that. Let's call it choose from loot pool. Like so. We'll have a return of a type name. So this will be our chosen loot. And as an input, we need to have the array of names that we created earlier. So we'll change this to an array, and we'll say possible loot pool. Like so. Now the logic in here is going to be very simple. What we're going to be doing is we're just going to be taking the last index here from this array, and we'll be taking a random integer in range. This will allow us, we need to rehook this one to go into the max instead. So it will get a random integer between 0 and whatever the index is here. So we'll get one of the items. And we need to drag out from the array and type in get. And we'll hook up that index that we have just randomized, and then we say that this is the item that we chose. So that's done. We go back to our determine loot, and we can now drag in our choose loot from pool in here. So we'll do this. We'll hook up the array, and now out from this we should be getting our value that we're after. So let's find our return, drag it down here, and make sure to connect these up. So now this should be done more or less. So now the game mode should be able to spawn a loot either from a category or from a key, and it should theoretically work, but we don't have any way of actually having this happen yet. So to do this, we will do a few couple of things. First off, we're going to create a blueprint interface to make the communication a little bit easier and cleaner. So we right click, go to blueprints, blueprint interface, we'll call it BPI underscore spawn loot. We'll enter into it and we'll create a function which we call spawn loot request. We will make sure that the spawning of loot request is of the type, let's see, we will be needing all of the inputs that we had on the spawn loot. So we'll be needing a position, so a spawn location. We will be needing another one for the key, so e underscore loot key. And we will be needing a third one for our loot category, so a gameplay tag, like so. We'll name this loot category and loot key, like so. Compile, save, then we go to our game mode and we go to class settings and we add this interface, so BPI spawn loot. We have that one done. We go to our interfaces and implement the spawn loot request. And what we do here is we make sure to call on the spawn loot function that we have. Then we just hook up our inputs. A little bit crisscross, but that's fine. Like so. Now we can go to our character and let's put in some debugging functionality here so we can see how this is working. We go to the event graph. Let's create a key. So keyboard and E. There we go. And what we want to do here is very simple. We want to get our game mode. And since we have a blueprint interface now, we don't need to cast this. So we'll just type out spawn item, loot is what we call it, right? This one, spawn loot request, like so. And drag it over here. And then we want a location also. We can get our actor location for the character. And we'll plug it in like so. And this should theoretically be everything that we need. So let's test this out. So let's start off with just choosing a loot first. So let's choose our full plate helm. Compile, save. So now by running around here, we should be, if we press E key, respawning a helmet. So that is as expected and that's good. We don't get any debug information about this, which could be useful. So let's go to our game mode and let's go to our spawn loot. After we have spawned loot, let's print. And this print string will do an append for. And we can say that the first one should say chosen loot, colon, and the last one should be the name of whatever we have determined to be the loot, which is our local variable called local determined loot. So we'll hook that up like so. Compile, save, and run again. And let's try this again. So now you can see chosen loot full plate helm up there. And that seems fine. Let's go and choose something else. So let's choose Excalibur. We're spawning swords now instead, and you can see that it says chosen loot Excalibur up there. So far so good. So let's get to the actual cool part about this by using gameplay tags. Let's remove our key because we don't want a specific loot. We want to have something from our gameplay tags. If we now go and choose sword here, for example, you can see it marks everything down to sword. We can only have one specific item and its subsections marked at one time. If I were to choose armor, it will unchoose weapon here, for example, you can see. So if we have sword now, compile, save, and run, you can see we get a chosen loot Excalibur and possible loot Excalibur. Let's go actually into our game mode and change the duration to be 5, just like the other one. So what we're doing here is we're saying our pool is possible loot, so it's only one item, and what we end up with is the Excalibur. That's essentially what's happening here, because we only have requirements meeting one of these items. If we were to instead go over here and say we want armor, and compile and save, We know we have 3 items of armor in our database table, and pressing the button you now see that we have as possible loot all 3 items, and then it chooses one of them. And each time we run, there is a possibility that another item is chosen here. So it's working as randomly because we're getting all different items, although some of them are getting more lucky than others. Now we have 2 different categories. We have armor and weapon, but we have made a subcategory of equipment as well. So if we choose equipment only, this means we're actually able to spawn in all the armor pieces, but also the sword piece. So that is all we're going to be going through in the first part. I hope you join me in the second part when we will be refining this and building upon this and also adding loot tables. I hope to see you there. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.